The rhizarians are most known for pseudopodia. Pseudopodia are very, very long projections, and these are going to be very thin projections from the cell, and these can be used for feeding, or they could also be used for movement and moving around. We've got three groups within the rhizarians that we're going to talk about, and the first up is the radiolarians. Those are the ones that you're seeing in this picture here, and as you can see, they do have pseudopodia, so these are all good examples of the pseudopodia here. So they're just these long projections, like little feet, that they can use for moving and feeding. Now with these, they are very delicate little structures. They do have some silica that helps to make them up, so they're a little bit glass-like in appearance when you look at them. The next group are the foraminiferans. And these are unique in that these have these porous structures, or these porous shells. And these shells are made from calcium carbonate. And we really don't know a whole lot about these. What we do know is primarily from the fossil record. So they're very well represented in the fossil record. And as you can see in the picture here, they do have this unique look to them compared to the other protists that we've been looking at in this chapter. The third group are the cercozoans, and these are amoeboid-like organisms. So by amoeboid, we're talking about something similar to the picture that you see here. We also have some that are flagellated, and these are mostly heterotrophs. So when we say that they're mostly heterotrophs, this means that these are not going to be organisms that are photosynthesizing. These are going to instead be a lot of times predatory protists, so they would be engulfing other protists, other bacteria, but small things. And usually they're using their pseudopodia to do that. So they're engulfing them, and then they're going to be digesting them by what we call phagocytosis. The next big group that we're going to talk about are what we call the Archaeplastida. This is a very large group, and this happens to be monophyletic. So it's monophyletic, but if you look in this little tree over here, it includes some very different organisms. So we have a couple different types of algae here. We have the red algae and we have the green algae, but then you also have our land plants in here. And the land plants themselves are considered their own kingdom. That's going to be kingdom Plantae. So there's a lot of talk. We said that it's not really decided how the protists should be classified. There are some individuals that feel that this really should be one major grouping right here when we're talking about the Archaeplastida. But instead, we've got some of the members being classified as protists, and then we have some that are being classified as land plants. So we're not going to talk about the land plants here because we're going to talk about them in the plant chapter, but we do want to talk about the other members. The red algae are some multicellular algae. These are quite large, just like the brown algae, but these aren't going to be quite as large as the brown algae. So these are multicellular. Also want to point out here that these are commonly known as rhodophyta. So that comes from the fact that they are red, or they have this red pigment. The red pigment that they have is called phycoerythrin. And that can give them the red color. It sometimes can be a light green. It can range all the way to a dark brown, almost a black color. There's even a few of them that don't have any pigment at all, and those are going to be parasitic ones. So most of them will be autotrophic, but we do have the parasitic few that are within this category. That phycoerythrin, it enables them to capture light very deep in the ocean. So that light has to penetrate a lot of depth of water, and they're still able to utilize that light when it gets to them. One thing about these is they don't have any flagellated stages. So that will be a little bit unique to them. Next up is the green algae. And when we talk about the green algae are going to be primarily freshwater organisms. We have two major groups within them. We have the charophytes and then the chlorophytes. The charophytes are most known as the closest living relative or ancestor, really, of land plants. So those we're going to talk about when we get to the land plant chapter, which will be chapter 29. And then the chlorophytes is what we're going to focus on in this chapter. The chlorophytes are quite diverse, and they have basically every cell type that you can think of. So they have unicellular organisms. We have up here ones that form a colony. So what we're seeing in this picture is right here is kind of a little bag, and it includes all of these other cells which are living independently from each other. And then we also have some that look more like typical algae, which you see in this picture here, and then like land plants as we know them. The chlorophytes do have complex life cycles. And we do have some flagellated stages here. And you do see that here in this picture that's showing the unicellular one. Most of them, or at least some of them, are also going to have some alternation of generations. We last saw that when we looked at the brown algae. So if we take a look here at a life cycle, typical life cycle of the chlorophytes, there's quite a bit of variation there. This one's what we call Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas can reproduce asexually. That's what you're seeing in this picture here, where we do have the mature cell. It can be haploid, and it can undergo mitosis to produce additional haploid zoospores. And we can have those then combine with other haploid zoospores that happen to be sexually compatible, and those will fuse together so that we get formation of a zygote. That zygote then undergoes meiosis, and it does produce additional haploid zoospores. Now on this slide, we're not seeing that alternation of generations that we said is possible for chlorophytes, because remember that alternation of generations would require multicellular haploid and diploid stages, and in this case we don't see any multicellular stages at all. So that will be something that we will just find in some of the chlorophytes. We move on and talk about our last major grouping here. This is the Unikonta. This includes a pretty diverse group as well, because not only do we have some new groups of protists, we have fungi here, which make up their own kingdom, and we also have animals here on the bottom, which make up their own kingdom. So we're going to be talking about the other ones that you see here. So if we look at the first one, the amoebozoans. The amoebozoans have a couple different groupings within them, and the first one are the slime molds. The slime molds, due to some convergent evolution, they tend to look like fungi, and these can be divided into two different groups. We have what's called the plasmodial slime molds, and then we're also going to have the cellular slime molds. The plasmodial slime molds are really quite odd little organisms, because these is a mass of nuclei, essentially, that's not divided into individual cells. So a lot of times these are called supercells, because you seem to have one major cell that just has a ton of nuclei in it, because we have mitotic division and there's absolutely no cytokinesis taking place. What these do is they spread out. They occupy a very large area, so they have a very large surface area which can absorb a lot of water and nutrients from the surrounding. They tend to be very brightly colored, which is what you're seeing in this picture here. They're brightly colored oranges and yellows typically. And once they exhaust all of their food resources, that's when they produce the structures that you see here. So these are called fruiting bodies. And those fruiting bodies, they would produce little spores that could then travel somewhere else so that they could perhaps colonize a new location with a new food source. So here we see a feeding plasmodium. These are the, like I said, these are the plasmodial slime molds. So this right here would be that supercell. So notice you just have a mass that has a whole bunch of nuclei inside of it. If it runs out of food, then it's going to start to develop these fruiting bodies. These fruiting bodies are called sporangia, and within that is where the spores develop. So these happen to have a stalk, which is going to kind of raise them up so they're a little bit higher. That would help with dispersal. and then the spores are going to get dispersed. So these haploid spores would be dispersed, and then wherever they land, we're going to have them develop into either little flagellated cells, or they can also develop into amoeboid cells, and they can recombine again and with each other, or they could recombine with another species, and then we could have development of a zygote again and a feeding plasmodium. So this shows you how they live kind of two different ways. They exhaust a food supply as a plasmodium, and then they turn themselves into little spores so that they can find another food source. So they're somewhat living as a colony, somewhat living individually, kind of blurs the lines there a bit. The cellular slime molds look fairly similar if we're looking at them on a macroscopic level. So this is somewhat like a little mass, but the big difference here is that it's cellular. So these have those cell distinctions, the boxes that are separating them from each other. So there's a plasma membrane around each cell. We no longer have that mass of nuclei. And these do work individually as long as they have food. And then if they run out of food, that's when they start to work together as a colony to build that sporangium that they can then lift up high on a stalk and then be dispersed a little bit better. So this is a case where we see cells switching between working independently and then switching to working as a colony. It's a little unique in that case. If you look here, we can see that on one hand, it's very similar to what we saw with the slime molds. So here we have the mass of cells, but these are individual cells. They work together so that they can make this fruiting body or the sporangia. They raise it up very high, and then the cells or the spores can be dispersed very well. And then at that point, they can work individually to eat. And so they work individually, they will eat until they run out of food. And then that's when they're going to combine together in a multicellular organism yet again, and then produce another fruiting body. The other two groups that we have on here are not as well known. We have these that are mostly the gymnamoebas. These are mostly unicellular. They are mostly heterotrophic. And then the entamoebas on the bottom, these are all parasites. And these are parasites that affect animals, and they also affect invertebrates. Other than that, we're not going to say a whole lot about those. The last grouping of the Unikonta is what we call the Opisthocons, and this is very diverse. It's going to include some animals, fungi, and then also protists in this. So a very diverse grouping in this one. To finish up this chapter, let's mention briefly the ecological impacts of protists. They have two major roles in the environment. They can be symbionts, and we see some of that. Examples of that is that you have a number of them that work alongside parts of the coral reefs, and they help to support that particular ecosystem. They can help the corals to absorb nutrients that they might need, and on the other side of it, the corals are supporting those protists as well. We also have them present in the guts of termites. They help termites to digest the cellulose and the wood that the termites are consuming. So those are just a couple of the examples of them functioning as symbionts. They are also producers. We talked about a number of those. So these are organisms that are going to be photosynthesizing and converting inorganic carbon dioxide into organic molecules. Those are molecules that then other organisms can later use. So all of those heterotrophs are going to be dependent on producers of some sort. So it's thought that protists themselves produce about 30% of the photosynthesis that takes place. So that's quite a lot. And not only are they producing the organic carbon, but that means they're also contributing to the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Another impact, which we've mentioned a number of times already, is the fact that these can be parasites. Okay, that would be a negative impact, obviously. But there are a lot of ecologically important parasites, and this is not only affecting humans, but other organisms, aquatic organisms, and land organisms as well. This could be mammals or invertebrates. We can also have ones that are parasites of plant species. So they can cause a lot of crop losses, so they can have huge economical impacts.